Welcome to today's podcast. My name is Pearlie Brewer, and I will be your host. Today's podcast guest is Tim Peterson. Tim is President and CEO of WorkSafe New Brunswick. Welcome, Tim.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Look forward to a good conversation.
First of all, I guess I need to congratulate you on your appointment to your current position. President and CEO of WorkSafeNB as of June last year.
Yes, well,
thank you. Achievement.
Thank you very much. Very happy to have been appointed. Very happy to be the first CEO promoted from within the organization. So, I was thrilled when the board made their decision. So.
Yeah, I was thinking on the weekend that you have been the first promoted that I could think of promoted from within. Quite an achievement.
Yes, well, thank you very much. I'm proud of that fact, and I'm very pleased that the board has made that decision. I think it sends a very positive, strong signal to the organization as well, that you can have not only can you have a career here, ultimately you can find your way to the top of the organization. So yeah, very, very pleased with that.
Now I would assume it's pretty good as an organization. They must feel pretty good from the point of view that in these tough economic times, you have a president and CEO with a good financial background. It certainly has to come in handy.
Oh, it certainly does. I would say, I've been with WorkSafe for 28 years, and my background is in finance. I'm a chartered accountant by trade, and definitely those skills come in handy. You're right about that.
Yeah. So today, what I want to do is walk through a variety of topics relative to WorkSafeNB. I'm going to start at the very top, the board of directors. For folks that may not be familiar with the sort of structure and the way WorkSafe operates, do you want to describe the structure of the board of directors and the role of the board and the board chairperson?
Yep, for sure. So we have what is called a stakeholder board. We have 10 board members. We have a chairperson, a vice chair, and then the stakeholder piece is we have 4 members of the board who are representative of workers and 4 members of the board who are representative of employers. The board structure is really meant to bring a balance to the discussions at the board, right? So our board deals with a few very key things. So one is the establishment of policy. One is the setting of assessment rates. And then the other big thing they do is they set sort of our fiscal or investment strategy. And the stakeholder nature of the board really is to bring views from the various stakeholders, both employers and workers, to the table to inform a really balanced discussion. And ultimately, that's what the board is trying to achieve in all of their decision making, a system that's going to be fair for both the workers and employers of the province.
Now, during the past decade, I've been doing a lot of courses around the province, especially joint health and safety committees. And it's interesting when I talk about joint health and safety committees and I talk about equal representation. Some folks, well, why such a big emphasis on equal representation? And I often go back and tell them that, you go way up the chart in the organization to safety, to WorkSafe, and even at the board level, it's equal representation.
It is.
And I often talk about it's a big principle for them.
Right. And the board is also challenged with, they are at the table representing the stakeholder communities, but we do ask them to kind of check their hat, like bring the views and opinions of your stakeholders to the table, but make sure that you're able to have a good balanced discussion, right? So, and you asked me about the chair, the role of the chair. Really, I see the role of the chair as being that the individual is going to set clear objectives for the board of directors. They're going to make sure that at board meetings, everyone has the opportunity to contribute so that there's no one person sort of dominating the conversation or one side dominating the conversation. Very important, often I think overlooked component of the chair's role is keeping to the agenda. So when you set an agenda for the board of directors, you have a specific amount of time and you have very key issues you want to discuss. So you want to make sure that keeping to that agenda allows you the appropriate time. I find far too often in meetings what happens is If you have key items at the end of the agenda, they often don't get the discussion required because you've spent too much time on other items. So that's key. Maintaining a good relationship with the CEO. So if you have a chair and a CEO who are butting heads, it's really not beneficial for the organization. So having a good, strong relationship with the CEO and a good, strong relationship with the minister, with government.
Now, who is your CEO right now? Or not your CEO, rather, but excuse me, the chairperson.
Yeah, our chairperson right now is Mel Norton.
Okay.
Yeah, so Mel is former mayor of the city of St. John, and Mel's been with us for, I think he's been with us for 3 years now as chair.
Now, who's on your board right now? Just to give folks a sort of a sense of who ends up on this board.
Yep, sure. So our vice chair currently is Haley Flero. Haley is with Abilities New Brunswick. And then for our board members, worker representatives, we have Jim Stanley, Mike McMullen, Mike's from Unifor, Donna McNeil, and Denny Vautour.
Okay.
And then our employer reps currently are Lucien Saunier, Gaetan Guret, Tina Susi, and Bert Sear.
Okay. Now, how long a term do the board's members serve?
So the board members initially are appointed for a 5-year term, and then they're eligible to be reappointed for 2 terms of 3 years each.
Okay.
So if you were a board member who served full terms, you would have been there for 11 years.
So your role as president and CEO, how does that sort of interact with the board?
Really responsible to the board for the operations of WorkSafe. So the board, as I mentioned, the board retains some key strategic decisions, like setting the assessment rate as an example. But for the most part, all of the day-to-day operations are delegated to myself as president and CEO. And in addition to that, really what I'm trying to do is make sure that everything that we do is with a view to achieving the strategic objectives set by the board. Our board goes through a strategic planning exercise every 3 years, and they set specific objectives. So our strategic plan currently is all centered on people, prevention, and integrity. And there are specific objectives within each of those dimensions of the plan. And I really want to make sure everything that we're doing from my level down throughout the organization is contributing to those strategic goals.
Okay, now would you like to talk about those 3 goals for a moment?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. So back in the fall of 2021, the board set the strat plan for the year 2022, 2023, and 2024. And it's all centered around the notions of people, prevention, and integrity. So people, we want to make sure that the people in our organization and the people we serve, so both our staff and our clients, have an exceptional experience with WorkSafe New Brunswick. We want you to walk away, as clients, walk away from your interactions with WorkSafe saying, wow, I'm really pleased with the service that I received. And from our staff perspective, I want you to come to work every day loving the culture that we've created at WorkSafe New Brunswick. That's the people part. Prevention really is, we're trying to shift the discussion about prevention. So we have historically at WorkSafe talked about prevention in terms of preventing workplace accidents and injuries. The shift is that we want to broaden that to talk about not just the prevention of accidents, but the prevention of ongoing disability that results from accidents. So prevention for us has become a much broader conversation. So, we want to focus on accidents not happening. We know they happen. Then we want to focus on prevention of ongoing disability.
So how do you do that?
That's really about early intervention is really the key.
Okay.
And making sure that there's a good relationship with the workplace, so that, ideally what we're trying to do with early intervention is trying to maintain a workplace connection. So let's work on workplace accommodation right out of the gate, so that we don't have that break. And if we do have that break, let's make sure that we have an early intervention so that we can get people back on track with a rehab plan at the earliest possible moment in the claim.
Okay.
Right.
Now, a moment ago when you talked about the people element, you talked about satisfaction both of the client and the employees. Now, one thing I'm not sure many people would know, that you regularly do satisfaction surveys with the clients of WorkSafe.
We do client.
Talk to us about that.
Okay, we do. We survey injured workers and employers, and we're actually gonna move to surveying workers in general. We've tended to focus just on injured workers, but we want to understand how workers in general are feeling about health and safety in their workplace and services that they receive, or the presence of WorkSafe New Brunswick. So we do that. We've been doing that every other year, and we recently have shifted that to an annual survey. And the reason that we've done that is because we just feel like every other year is just not often enough to be hearing from our clients. Things are changing, on a daily, weekly basis. So let's do this annually, so that we're hearing the voice of the client more often.
What kind of result would you get from your satisfaction surveys?
It's been fairly consistent. So from from a worker perspective, generally we're somewhere in the 60%, 60 to 70%. And from an employer perspective, we've tended to be more 70 to 80%. There's been historically about a 10% gap between the two. But what I would say to you is neither of those results is satisfactory. We want to be definitely north of 80% satisfaction for both workers and employers.
So how do you get there?
I think you get there by building relationships, by building partnerships, and by approaching our work and our education of folks in a different manner. So when I say that, what I really mean is I'm very much a collaborator, and I feel like the path forward in terms of improving health and safety in the province is really from that collaborative perspective. So yes, we have the ability to go in as a regulator and, kind of bring the hammer down and issue orders. But plan A, from my perspective, should always be have a conversation. Let's sit down like we are, just have a conversation about health and safety in a particular workplace, and try to just have more meaningful conversations about the issue and bring people along that way, as opposed to just go in and strictly from an regulatory enforcement standpoint.
Now, do you have any initiatives towards that end?
We do have an initiative. So, it's generally the initiative focuses all around collaboration and more meaningful interventions. So it's about taking more time in each workplace. Now, the natural outcome of that is that we've been getting to fewer workplaces, but I'm okay with that because the interactions that we're having are more meaningful.
Okay. So I want to focus especially today on prevention, but before we get in there, I want to talk about assessment rates. For folks that are listening that may not be familiar with this term even, talk to us about assessment rates, what they are, how they're set.
So assessment rates are sort of the base that we use to charge employers. So our system is fully funded by the employers of the province. So we make an estimation of the costs of the system in a particular year. So those costs are claim costs. So we do an analysis of expected number of claims and expected duration, so that we get an idea of what our claims costs are for that accident year. And then we have administration costs, because we have people that administer the system. We're staff of about 500 people at WorkSafe. So what we do is we make an estimation of those costs, and then that will drive what the assessment rate is. So the employers of the province are charged based on their assessable payroll, and they pay a rate per $100 of payroll, right? So once we know the estimated costs and we know how much payroll there is, then we just do the math to figure out what is the average rate that we need to establish that's going to enable us to collect funds from the employers to cover those costs. And so if you looked at it, right now I think we're around $12 billion of payroll in the province. So if you're paying per $100, that means your base is about $120 million. If we estimated that the costs that we needed to recover were $120 million, then the average rate would be $1. Okay. That's how that would work. It's not $1, but it's getting better. So we've come through a very challenging time in terms of costs and assessment rates. They peaked in 2019. The rate peaked in 2019 at $2.65 per $100 of payroll. We were tied for the highest rate in the country at that point. We have come a long way. In 2021, by 2021, we had dropped to $2.17. In 2022, last year, we charged on average $1.69, and for 2023, the board has established the rate at $1.31. So the rate in 2023 is less than half of what it was in 2019. That's good news for everybody. And the best news is that means that claim costs are lower. And if claim costs are lower, that has to mean that there are fewer accidents and we're doing a better job of getting people back to work. So the system is in a very healthy position right now. At the end of 2021, we were 147.5% funded. And at $1.31, we are the lowest rate in Atlantic Canada, and we're one of only 3 jurisdictions in the entire country that announced a rate decrease for 2023. So there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about the direction that the system is headed.
So why the big change? I mean, you mentioned a couple things, but like digging a little deeper. I'm sure some people would say, well, like what? Why such a big drop? What did you do that facilitated that?
Yeah, I think I would say there were a couple of things. So there's been a lot of work. There has been a lot of work done on WorkSafe's end. We've been focusing a lot on early intervention, as I mentioned, and that means that we're having more success at getting people back to work quicker, in a safe fashion always, but quicker, which means that claims aren't going on as long. Mm-hmm. And if claims aren't going on as long, that means that they're not costing as much. We've seen a continued decline over the past 2 years in accident frequency. So in 2022, although the numbers are not finalized, I think we'll see that we've decreased to about maybe 1.2 accidents per 100 full-time equivalents. That would be the lowest. Last year in 2021, actually, I'll use as a reference year, was our lowest accident frequency in over a decade, and we were the lowest in the country.
Now, would that have anything to do with COVID?
Some of it could, but we were trending down even before COVID. But certainly I think it would be, it wouldn't be fair to say that COVID didn't have an impact. Certainly, it would have had an impact. Now, the other thing that's happened is there's been a lot of very important legislative change. We got to a rate of 265 because costs were increasing at a rapid pace, and we had specific legislation in place at the time that empowered the Workers' Compensation Appeal Tribunal to basically overturn board policy. And that had a significant impact on costs of the system because the board, as I mentioned, one of the key things that the board does is establish policy, and those policies are established really to in an effort to try and provide parameters around benefits, provide fair benefits for workers, but having policy in place to sort of guide staff as to where those benefits begin and end. And what was happening was what we were seeing is quite an increase in the types of benefits that were being provide it through the appeal tribunal. So that's a long way of saying that was having a significant impact on costs. That there was legislation introduced. I believe it was towards the end of 2018 that basically restored the board's policy-making authority, and that had a significant impact. In addition to all the initiatives that we're working on at WorkSafe.
So, what's the status of the 3-day waiting period?
The 3-day waiting period has been eliminated.
Okay.
Right. So it had been phased out. That wasn't it. That's some more. Thank you for bringing that up. More important legislative change. That had been gradually eliminated. It's now totally gone. So there is no waiting period.
Now, there's so much we could talk about today. I'm going to, at this point, sort of cut our discussion off as to moving a bit into maybe compensation areas. And I want to focus especially today on accident prevention. At some point, I do want to have a podcast dedicated solely to the topic of workers' compensation. But for now, I'd like to move directly into accident prevention. And you mentioned earlier accident frequency in 2022 and the workplace fatalities. What's the number in 2022?
Based on the information I have right now, the number of workplace fatalities we'll be reporting for 2022 is 9, which is 9 too many, in my estimation. We'll never be satisfied until we have 0 workplace fatalities. But it is an improvement. It is an improvement over the last couple of years. In 2020, we had 12 fatalities, and in 2021 we had 14. So while 9 is not a good number, it is an improvement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Frequency, you mentioned?
I did mention that. So in 2022, again, the data matures, right? So we're in February. We're continuing to receive accidents from 2022. So these numbers are subject to change, but as we sit here today, we're at accident frequency of 1.1 per 100 workers, and that is an improvement from the last couple of years. 2020 we were at 1.3, and in 2021 we were at 1.2. And as I mentioned, that 2021 number was actually the lowest in the country. Now,
what about for 2022? Any sense, or I suppose it's too early to really know what the other provinces' numbers would be like?
Yeah, I don't. Unfortunately I don't have an indication. I did have data on their assessment rates, because typically they're being set in Q4 of the prior year. But in terms of the reporting of frequencies, no, that'll be later on, probably looking at towards the end of Q2 before we'd have any comparable data.
Now, when you look back at 2021, 2022, any specific accident trends that stand out? Any areas, industries?
There are both. Actually, there are both areas and industries. So certainly COVID has had a bit of an impact, for sure. We saw additional claims, COVID claims. So we've had several hundred COVID claims that have been accepted. We compare very favorably to the rest of Canada in that regard, but certainly those are injuries and accidents that we hadn't had in the past.
Now, excuse me for interrupting here,
yep.
But over the last decade, doing a lot of workshops, obviously a topic that kept coming up over and over was COVID. What does WorkSafe, what did they accept, what didn't they accept? Now, you mentioned you accepted a number of claims.
We did.
What kinds of claims would there have been?
I mean, they would have been claims where folks have gotten COVID, and to the degree that it's put them off work for a period of time.
Okay.
But the determination of whether COVID was a result of a workplace exposure goes through the same test that we put every other application for benefits through. So we have a team of adjudicators whose responsibility is to make decisions on claims. And when they're making those decisions, they're trying to really determine two things. Did the accident or exposure arise out of and in the course of employment? And to do that, they look at things like time, place, and activity. So, did the exposure occur during a time when you were working? Where were you at? What activity were you engaged in? So those tests were applied equally to any application that we received that was related to COVID. And in those, I think we're around 600, give or take, claims that have been accepted. We would have established that the people contracted COVID as a result of a workplace exposure.
That surprises me. That's quite a few.
It is quite a few, but I would say to you, other jurisdictions in the country were in the thousands and some in the tens of thousands.
Wow.
But I do want to talk, just before we leave the topic of sort of what are the emerging areas that we're seeing. Not emerging, but always an issue are repetitive strain injuries, soft tissue injuries. We continue to be challenged with that.
So what are you doing to address that?
With respect to the repetitive strain injuries, it's really about trying to educate folks. So we have a group of ergonomists who are specifically dedicated to developing materials and education for workplaces. So if you go out to our website, WorkSafeNB.ca, you'll see multiple resources dedicated to repetitive strain and soft tissue type injuries. And our ergonomists, interestingly, recently have been provided with their orders in council so that they now have the status of a health and safety officer. So when they're in a workplace, if they determine that there are practices that may be contributing to these types of injuries, they're actually able to write orders now.
That's good.
Yeah,
Excellent.
So that's new. That's very, very positive step forward. The final one that I want to mention, and I would say that when I interact with my counterparts across the country, this is really two things really rise to the top when we talk about health and safety. One is health and safety in the healthcare sector. Mm-hmm. We're all challenged with continuing trends in healthcare. The other one is psychological injuries. So psychological health and safety and traumatic psychological injuries specifically are something that we're seeing a significant increase. Over the last 3 to 4 years, they've doubled in New Brunswick.
What all will be covered there?
Traumatic psychological injuries really are if you have a reaction to a workplace event that causes you some type of psychological trauma. So oftentimes you're seeing these injuries occur in I use correctional facilities as an example.
Okay.
If there's a specific interaction with an inmate, it could, we all react differently to certain events, but if that triggered a reaction, a psychological reaction and psychological type injury, those are the types of things that we're talking about. Or it could be witnessing, a severe injury.
Now, there was a time that were these tied to single events? Are they still tied to single events, or can they occur over a period of time?
No, it's still. When I say an acute reaction, that's what I mean. It's a reaction to a specific event, as opposed to sort of like a cumulative stress type of injury. It still is restricted to a reaction to a specific incident.
Now, you talk about healthcare. What all are you doing as an organization to address the continuing concern about the healthcare industry?
So we've engaged, our prevention team has been engaged with both Horizon and Vitalite. Both of them have working groups that have been put together to specifically address health and safety. We've been invited into those groups, so that's very positive. We have an opportunity there to interact on a regular basis, really with a view to helping them to identify where the significant gaps are and what's a plan moving forward to address those gaps. Now, we also have the healthcare sector, I guess specifically the nursing care sector, has their own safety association. So the Continuing Care Safety Association, and their efforts are dedicated to improving health and safety in nursing homes and other long-term care facilities. So
I know you've been at that area or focusing on that area for a period of time. Are you making any progress? Do you feel you're making any progress?
we're seeing some progress, not as much as we would like. The rate of, when we talk about accident frequency, for the most part, these are areas that are sort of in the public sector. When we talk about accident frequency, we've historically seen about twice the accident frequency in the public sector. So it has been coming down, which is the good news. But it's still significantly more than what we're seeing in the assessed population. So there's still lots of work to do. But I am encouraged by I'm encouraged by things like being invited to the table, WorkSafe, right? And I think that speaks again to trying to make a difference by being seen as a collaborator, right? Mm-hmm. So that's important. And then I see other things happening, out in the public sector outside of healthcare, specifically in education, where recently there were health and safety coordinators appointed in each of the school districts. So those are signals to me that people are starting to take health and safety more seriously. And, it takes time, right? But we see building blocks being put in place, and I'm very encouraged by that.
At this point, where I guess probably I'm about halfway through the questions that I want to ask. So at this point, we're going to stop our podcast. What we've been trying to do for folks listening is keep our podcast to around 30 minutes. With some of our speakers, and obviously Tim here, a great case. So many things we'd like to ask, so many questions we want to ask to you. So we're going to break off our podcast at this point. Coming up in the second part of our podcast, I'm going to be asking Tim some questions around legislation changes. I know you're doing a lot in that area, education and enforcement. So folks, listening to part one of our podcast, very soon you get a chance to listen to part two of our podcast.